D. McClung, Archer Monologues. That's where I talk and you don't. All right. Item 1. There was a U.S. Appeals Court erases ruling allowing gun sales to people under 21. That's like 18, 19, and 20. Now, here's the thing. Well, we'll get to the thing in a second. Let me refer to the article. The article states, all right, the federal measures being challenged bar handgun sales to people ages 18, 19, and 20. All right. Really? In July decision, the panel's majority said people as young as 18 had a right to own guns under the U.S. Constitution's Second Amendment guarantee of the right to keep and bear arms. However, really? It also said young adults could not be relegated to second-class status, notwithstanding the weighty interest in reducing crime and violence. All right, seriously, let's think about this for a second. All right. The U.S. Supreme Court is scheduled to hear arguments on November the 3rd in a separate case testing the constitutionality of a New York law restricting people's ability to carry guns outside the home. Well, you know what they're going to say, don't ya? Because the Supreme Court is a farce. For one thing, when a Supreme Court ruling comes in and it's like 5-4, you know that it's a joke. Because when the Supreme Court rules on a case and it isn't 9-0, excuse me, then you know there's a problem. And you know there's a problem when the ruling is like, well, now it could be 6-3. You know that the party lines are involved. If all of the conservative Republicans on one side are voting in one way, and all of the Democrats on the other side are voting, which would be like liberals, open-minded people, and people who give a shit about freedom and, equality and justice, and what's that one there? Equal under the law kind of shit. And you know there's a problem. Because the Supreme Court is supposed to be, in this case, as of now, at least, 9 judges or people on the bench of the Supreme Court who are supposed to look at something like a law or a case where the law itself may be unconstitutional, or where the law was used in a case illegally. All right? So, number one, you know the Supreme Court is a joke when all 9 justices don't read the Constitution in English and conclude with absolute certainty that the English that is used to describe or is used to in the writing of the Constitution, let's say the Second Amendment, when it says quite clearly in English, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Period. When judges come up with a ruling like a 5-4, you know that there's somebody on that on that panel that doesn't know how to read English, or they're being, shall we say, a bit biased, or they're following their party line, like, let's say 5-4 rule against the right to keep and bear arms. 5 judges are saying, nah, the Second Amendment doesn't say anything about the right, I repeat, the right to keep and bear arms. Really? And why would anybody say that? What kind of a judge who's in that position? Oh, by the way, they're appointed by presidents, and presidents are fucking lunatics sometimes. Like Bush was a fucking monster criminal, war criminal, freaking terrorist of the world, kind of disgusting scumbag who should have been sent to The Hague 20 years ago, along with his buddies like, Rumsfeld and Cheney and those monsters. However, if a Supreme Court does not read the words of the Second Amendment in English, and it says right there, as I've just said to you before, the right, do we understand the concept of what a right is? Well, when the Constitution uses the word right, it means it's a right in regards to the thing, meaning I have, that capacity to exercise a thing and behave in a certain fashion, or do a thing, or make a decision to do or not do a thing. The laws don't change that because they're unalienable. We're not talking about privileges here. We're talking about rights. So when a judge on the Supreme Court reads the words, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and turns around and says, it doesn't mean that, so I'm voting against this thing. I'm going to rule against the Second Amendment and say that the Second Amendment was not violated by a law that clearly says you don't have a right to keep and bear arms. What? Seriously. Every anti-gun law in this country is unconstitutional by the simple fact that the Constitution says you can't make that law. Now, I on a side note, people are concerned about violence and guns and shooting and death and, mass shootings and shit, and violence like with guns. Yeah, I understand that. I sympathize with people with that concern. I have that concern. I don't want anybody shooting people with guns. I'm not a gun shooting at people kind of guy. I'm not a gun nut. I have gun, parentheses S, parentheses closed. How many guns I have? None of your business. But I'm not a gun nut because I'm not. And someone comes along and says, you're a gun nut. And I just said, no, I'm not. That's English. And it means, no, I'm not. End of story. There is no further discussion because I've just addressed that issue. That issue is closed because, no, I'm not. What am I then? I'm a person who recognizes that guns exist, that some guns have different uses, like any tool. and that in some cases it is important to have something to defend yourself against the lunatics and the crazies, and the monsters, whether they be civilians, everyday next door neighbor kind of thing, or government. By the way, if you think that you're going to keep your guns and all of your neighbors are going to keep your guns, and at some point you're going to use your guns to put down the government that you think is trying to take your guns and, turn into a dictatorship or something and, take away your freedom. If you think you're going to go up against the United States government with your piddly little gun, and I don't care what kind of gun it is, big gun, little gun, whatever. If it goes bang or boom, I'm sorry, but the United States government and the state governments and a lot of local governments have better guns than you. And they are more determined to stop you from doing that. As wrong as they may be. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to, use your guns to protect your freedom, then, use your brain and, get over this notion that you're going to overthrow the government or some shit. Because ain't going to happen, dude. Not as long as the government has bigger guns and more guns than you. And, how many government agencies are there? How many government police officers are there, state, local, and federal? How many soldiers are there in this country that the government has control over and can say, hey, National Guard, take your guns, take your bullets, go down there at Fairmont, or wherever you live, and put down this, insurrection. Yeah, well, I'm sorry, but, if you're facing somebody with a bunch of guns, then, good luck, because they're going to kill you. It's that simple. I'm not saying we shouldn't I know, a lot of countries, they took away the guns and then there was a massacre or genocide, like in Germany and so on. Yeah, that's true. I see that statistic as a very valid point. However, America, okay, you're a bunch of hoodlums or a bunch of crazies or a bunch of redneck wackos, sorry. I mean, in the first place, if you belong to some sort of militia and you think carrying a gun around and being all, I got a gun, I'm going to defend my country against the government that's the dictatorship and traitors and shit, like they're talking now about things, like the Proud Boys and all those wackos. They're crazy. If anybody should not have a gun, it's a freaking redneck that thinks he's going to go to Washington and, take out the Congress like they tried on January 6th. Really? I know you don't agree with that, but, that's, you're one of them probably, and, you're a wacko. Anyway, how many guns? I got guns. I got a few guns. One or two or more or less. Who knows? I'm not telling you, it's none of your business. However, and they're not registered, by the way. You know why they're not registered? Because I don't have to register them. It's against the law for the government to ask me to register them. And yet they do in some places. Guess what? That law is unconstitutional. And, if the Supreme Court was actually a legitimate body of people that were to, actually going to be honest and true and faithful to the Constitution and the oath they took to protect our rights, then it would be 9-zip every single time. And they wouldn't even have to wait for a case. They could find a case by just just looking around, just watch the news, whatever. And you could find that, there are states in this country that have laws that are in constitutional violation. because they have a law saying you got to have a gun. You got to register it. You can't have it if you're a certain age. You can't defend yourself because, you're a bad guy. You can't have a gun. They don't let insane people, I'm people in insane asylums, they don't let you take a gun in an insane asylum, probably because they know you're insane, and, that would be crazy, insane, to let some inmate at a freaking lunatic bin, have a freaking gun. It's irresponsible, and it just wouldn't do it. And yet, if you have an insane person walking around out free in the world, just like that guy down the road that works at the gas station or something, carrying a gun on his hip, he has a right to do that. But, let's say he's insane. There has to be a reasonable way to deal with this sort of thing. And I think, personally, that we should be responsible as human beings and be responsible of our friends, our families, our neighbors. And, when we see a guy that is obviously insane, we take a compassionate position on this and, not let the lunatic have a gun. I realize there are families of lunatics. Every one of them. And, one guy gets a gun in the family, and the rest of the family says, well, he has a right to have a gun. He's my hero, even though the guy is insane. The rest of the family saying, we're not insane, but he is. And I think maybe the family should get together and suggest, maybe do an intervention. I'm sorry, Uncle Bill, but you're insane. And so we're not going to let you have a gun. Sorry, not going to happen. Just forget it. In other words, personal responsibility augmented by family and associates and friends, to take care of your family, to take care of your insane uncle. Don't let him hurt himself or other people. You wouldn't let an insane person have a freaking hunting knife, in his shorts in his bedroom while he's sleeping or whatever. I'm sorry, you're going to wake up with your throat cut. You wouldn't let your uncle do that, or your aunt, or your cousin, or your brother, or your dad, or whoever. I'm sorry, but you're freaking crazy, and we're not going to let you have a gun or a knife. We're just not, because it's just irresponsible of us to let you do that. I'm not talking about the government. Government shouldn't be deciding that. That's not their job. It should be us, taking care of each other. But if you have a whole family of lunatics, then who's going to do that? They probably all got guns. The whole family's lunatics. The whole family got guns. The whole family of lunatics running around with guns. Who's going to be responsible for those people? They're obviously not, because they're crazy. Do you think a whole family of lunatics is not possible? I know a family of lunatics. The whole family's crazy. I wouldn't trust any of them with a gun. I'm not going to tell them they can't have one, because I'm not, they're just people I know. They live, up the road somewhere. I'm not going to the house and say, hey, you guys give up your guns, because, you're lunatics. That would be crazy of me. I would get shot. In that case, you might have to have some intervention by someone who's not your brother, your father, your cousin, your neighbor, whatever. I don't know how to deal with that. That's not my job to figure out that's the solution to that one. But I can tell you, if my son is a lunatic, I'm not going to let him have a gun. I don't care how old he is. Sorry, son, you're not getting a gun. I guarantee it. Anyway, Constitution. states clearly the right. The right exists because the Constitution says the right exists. And by the way, the Constitution says the right exists because the right exists. And if there wasn't a Second Amendment, you still would have the right because it's a human right, not a constitutional right. And that's another thing that bugs me. People come along with this nonsense. Oh, it's a constitutional right. And they kind of like have a shorthand going there. But what they mean is there's a constitutionally protected right, which of course it isn't, because the government doesn't exercise its responsibilities and, protect the right. You follow me? All right. So the Constitution, they had an opportunity. They had 200 years for the Supreme Court to make the ruling declaring all these laws that violate our right, unconstitutional. End of story. Case closed. No more laws. Don't even think about it. If you do, we're going to have it declared unconstitutional because we're the judges and we do that. And we're going to put you in freaking jail. So if you guys down in Virginia or Mississippi or wherever the hell, and senators and the legislature of the state of Mississippi or Missouri or some other shithole state gets together and says, I'm not saying the people living there, I'm just saying the government is pretty weird. Anyway, they passed this law saying, you can't have a gun if you're under 21. Okay? Well, the law is clear. 18 is the legal age of adulthood, period, in this country. Everywhere in this country, it includes every human being in this country, period. So the government cannot say you can't have a gun if you're 18 or 19 or 20. Can't. It's impossible. It is against the law of the Constitution. It's against common sense. If you have any brains, you know that no, you can't have that law. So someone says, let's take it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has a chance to rule on that. And the Supreme Court says, you guys the law saying that people under 21 can't have a gun or can't buy a gun, whatever. Okay? And then all 9 judges in unison say your law is unconstitutional because right there in the Second Amendment it says you can't make that fucking law. End of story. Case closed. Done deal. Now, books, the histories, that law is off the books everywhere in the country. End of story. Problem solved. And that's why I say the Supreme Court is a farce, because they had opportunities, 200 some years worth of time, to simply state that fact. And they didn't do it. And that's why it's a joke. And what do I think the solution to that is? Well, as individuals, I don't know. Probably can't just do anything about that. But Americans as a group should just simply say to the Supreme Court, you didn't do your job, you're fired. All right, whatever. That's another issue at this point. I'm just telling you what I think about the Supreme Court and how it is a farce and a joke, and it's not doing its job. And you know why. Partisanship and all that shit. I was appointed by Trump, so I got to do what Trump wants. You're not a judge in that case. You're a fake. All right. I'm going to hold off for just a second. Take a break. Be right back. All right. Now, I hope I haven't rambled too much here. I'll do a short summation at the end. But finishing up on this one issue about the Supreme Court and ruling on the ability of people to exercise their rights to buy a gun if they're, say, 18, 19, and 20. This is what the article says. These young men and women are disappointed that the system continues to deny their equal access to fundamental liberties simply because of their youth. And because the litigation took too long, their lawyer, Elliot Harding, said in an email. In other words, they're no longer under 21. So the question of being denied their rights is mute because they're no longer in that class of people. I think somebody should bring a case to the Supreme Court, and I'm not sure how you could force the Supreme Court to be nonpartisan, but I don't know how you could force them to actually read the Constitution and follow it according to what it actually says. Don't know. Now, of course, you hear people a lot of times say things like, the Supreme Court interpreted the law or interpreted the Constitution. That's not their job. It's not a foreign language. It's English. It means what it means. And words mean what they mean. And I know people think, oh, the language is changing. Words don't change in their meanings. People might change the meanings of a word to mean something else that it doesn't mean, but the word still means what it means, regardless of this new fake definition. Like the word child, for example, means something else that it doesn't mean now, but it still means what it actually means, and it doesn't mean an adolescent or a teenager. Sorry, but it doesn't. All right. So I think we've come up with this thing about the law, the Supreme Court, and so forth. This is, it boggles my mind that people, particularly the Supreme Court and politicians in general, they can't seem to understand that English is English. And when the Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms should not be infringed, that means exactly what it means. That means every law in this country, and there's about 60,000 of them I hear. I haven't checked that out, but I read it somewhere, and it seems feasible. 60,000 laws in this country regarding basically that infringe upon the right to keep and bear arms of every human being in this country, according to the Second Amendment. Now, without the Second Amendment, they still have the right to keep and bear arms. I don't care if you live in Russia or Thailand or, Brazil. You have a right because it's a human right. It's not an American right. Understand? But because we're in America, we're talking about American situation, then let's just stick with that for now. So, the Constitution clearly states that. And without the Second Amendment, the right still exists because it's unalienable, meaning you were born with it. You know that. I shouldn't have to tell you. Now, if you're on the anti-gun side, you're wrong. It's that simple. And I can't understand how come the Supreme Court judges cannot unanimously say, declare the gun laws are unconstitutional and therefore null and void, end of story, case closed, forever and ever and ever and ever. Case dismissed, court adjourned, move on. And that would end all this nonsense. And like I said, it is responsibility of humanity as a society to deal with people who should not have a gun. And if you have a gun and you commit a crime with a gun, using a gun, as a tool of criminality, then you should, there should be consequences for that. I think it's much better if you don't do things like that. But if you do, then, you're going to have to lose your gun, dude. Now, there's a conflict. Every human being has the right to keep and bear arms to protect himself and so forth. But if you're irresponsible with your gun and you hurt somebody with it, like shoot somebody, This includes cops, by the way, who apparently seem to have a pretty big case of let's shoot the guy that doesn't have any gun money. You know, let's shoot the unarmed guy and murder him, basically. You know. So anyway, this is a bigger issue than I can talk about here, but the fact is we need to utilize human, intellectual, compassionate dealings with people who, one, are not responsible, and two, use a gun irresponsibly. And by the way, if you're a wife beater and you have guns, you know, it has nothing to do with you having guns. If you beat your wife, then you're a prick, and there should be consequences. But I don't know if it means you should lose your guns. I mean, that's probably an indication you're not very stable if you actually are crazy enough to hit someone, a woman particularly, or your children or your next door neighbor or whatever. It's probably an indication that you're mentally ill. All right, so let's sum up. The item was about the Supreme Court and people who are 18, 19, and 20 years old who are legal adults, and that's the law of the land, and there is no question about it. It's not debatable. And I really like to say that because, you know, some things are just what they are. And at some point, you just have to acknowledge that fact. That's the biggest problem I have with people on social media. You say a fact, they argue like it's not a fact. They want to argue, and they want to argue illogically. They come up with arguments that are not logical. They come up with absurd arguments that are just absurd and just silly. If you want to acknowledge a fact, 2 and 2 is 4. I want to hear you say it. Yes, 2 and 2 is 4. Then we're good. If you're going to argue about that fact, we're not going to have a discussion. There's no point to discussing something if one side of the parties conversing are going to deny reality. If you're going to suggest that, oh, the Supreme Court is blah, 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 or, you know, they interpreted the law, blah, 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 you know, that's not rational. And if you can't acknowledge the fact that the Supreme Court is a farce based on the facts, I mean, it's pretty obvious when you have Donald Trump appointing 2 or 3 judges to the Supreme Court, and you know they're like freaking lunatics, and they're not going to rule on the constitutionality of things, the cases, because they're like, you know, a Donald Trump crazy person. And I really don't understand how you could have, what is it, 75 million people in this country support Donald Trump? No, we voted for Donald Trump. He's our president, blah, blah, blah. He won the election. There was fraud, blah, blah, blah. You know, one, you're delusional. You're just fucking delusional. You're not mentally, you're not sane. You're not rational. You're not even logical. Because the facts say that's not true. The facts say he lost. And good, because he was not a good president. Yes, he was. Yes, he was. No, he wasn't. Don't argue with me. Oh, you're trying to interfere with I want to speak my mind. I have a right to say what I want. I have free speech, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Well, this is a monologue, so no, you don't. Yeah, over there in your world, wherever delusional world you live in, fine. Just go ahead, but not here. Not on my show. And not with me, because even if I'm not doing the podcast, I'm in my business, in my office, in my shop, in my studio, doing my thing. If you come to visit me, don't bring arguments. You might want to come and bring some questions and say, what do you think about this? And I'll tell you. You don't want to hear it? You don't want to know? Okay, fine, don't ask. Anyway, Supreme Court, it's a farce. I don't know what to do about it, but sure as hell not going to take them too seriously. I mean, take them seriously as being a fraud and, suggest what they should do to fix it, and I'm not sure what that would be. Maybe make some regulations. I hate that, but still, make some regulations saying that, you get to be a Supreme Court justice, but you can't be a member of any political party because that makes you biased, and you can't be unbiased and be a member of a political party. So, disavow your membership in any political party. And if you're appointed by I don't like that appointed by the president thing, because obviously he's going to appoint people that he thinks are going to follow his fucking stupid ideas, and this applies to every president. Democrats want to have Democrat judges. Republicans want Republican judges. How is that fair? That shouldn't have anything to do with this situation. Now, how would you appoint a Supreme Court justice? I don't know that the system is wrong, but the way it's done is wrong. All right. So if you're 18, 19, 20, and you can't buy a gun, then guess what? Your constitutionally protected right, your inalienable human right, is being violated. And somebody ought to do something about that. Like what? I don't know. Right? I hate to say anything about that sort of situation, knowing that half the people in this country, 75 million of them or so, are freaking lunatics. And on the other side, there's like 70, 80 million people on that side that are just stupid. We gotta ban guns. You can't. The Constitution says you can't. But we gotta, because, people are killing people. Yeah. Well, there's a different way, and that way is, you know what I said a while ago. All right. So I think I've summarized myself here a little bit. I think we get the gist. Supreme Court talked about that. The rights of all people to have keep and bear arms, in America at least, for sure. 18, 19, 20-year-olds are legal adults. They have all the rights and all the privileges and all of the abilities to exercise those rights as anyone over 21. Period. This is not debatable. And how could people keep arguing about this? It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. It tells me that people who do this, who are in charge of these things, like the government and the Senate and the Congress or whatever, Supreme Court and so on, they're fucking lunatics. They're not very smart. If you can't get it in your head, this is wrong, don't do this. You understand what I'm saying? It's just bizarre. But it's been that way a long time, so it's not getting any better. In fact, I think it's getting worse. I think more and more people are becoming stark raving mad. Like insane. I've lived a long time. I've lived through a lot of different things, but this is just bizarre. All right, that's enough for this time. I'll get to item 2 on the next show. Appreciate it, and catch you next time.